supposed to ask Al. Good morning. Everybody, enough. Mr. Burns, would you open us?
Glad to, Mr. Chairman. Let's pray, y'all. Lord, for this day we give you thanks, Father. And Lord, for each and every person represented in this room, we also give you thanks, Father. And we ask for your guidance and your forgiveness and your blessings on each one of us and the families that we represent. Lord, we know there's special needs within this room and within the families and the acquaintances that we're familiar with. And Lord, we just ask your blessings and work your will in each one of those circumstances. We know you are the great healer, and you have the understanding to know what's best for each and every situation. Again, Lord, we ask your blessings on this day. Bless us, help us make decisions that further your will here on this earth and enable us to work better with our fellow man. For all these things I ask in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Y'all know we start at 9:30, right? All of those who voted against the low voltage bill can leave. Your stuff ain't gonna make it. I assume nobody looked down and see who signed that dadgum thing.
That's right. If they do that, then half of the people will lose our quorum.
Richard just told me that if we did that, I'd lose my quorum. What y'all don't know, Earl has told me that I'm a quorum. I can go by myself. Chairman, go to the front if there is chairman. And y'all please be quick. Mr. Hitchens.
Want to get in line. I bring you today House Bill 405. This is it's on modified structure, page 2, fourth from the bottom. This is a GEMA emergency management bill. It seeks, I think most of you know, I used to be the director of GEMA emergency management. And what this does is seeks to identify people who are bringing necessities into an area that has been suffered from hurricane or tornadoes or whatever. And most people don't realize grocery stores have about 4 to 6 days worth of food in them. And if you have an area and the police cordon it off, which they always do, you can't get resupplies in most of the time. So this gives them placards or identification to those people pre-emergency so that they can move through the police lines and get those necessities into the area. GEMA Homeland Security and retail industry are all for this.
No questions, thank you. Mr. Pruitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under modified open rule, about halfway down the page, HB 382. This is the Georgia Commission on Women's. They're currently located under the Agency of Labor, and they have requested, and both the Labor Department, which is where they are now, and the Department of Public Health both have agreed for them to move over to the Department of Public Health. That's actually where their desk and things are currently anyway, but there's no money in the budget. This has nothing to do with funding. It's just a move.
Any questions? No questions, thank you. Mr. Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here on modified structure on the first bill on the second page, House Bill 116. This is a police protection bill that would allow a district attorney the choice to indict a juvenile into Superior Court who has committed an aggravated assault with a firearm upon a police officer or an aggravated battery upon a police officer.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Lott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am here to bring HB 301. It is on the last page under structured rule, fourth from the bottom. HB 301 is impactful to our healthcare community. This will change a tax deduction to a tax credit and encourage and incentivize our community care providers to aid in the training of our Georgia students for physicians assistants, and advanced practice registered nurses.
No questions, thank you. Ms. Kendrick.
Good morning, committee. I bring to you HB 78, which is the first bill that is on your calendar, and this is an update to the Georgia Securities Code. It reflects a new type of security that was created under federal law, and it allows the Secretary of State to continue to receive proper notice for companies that raise capital within our state.
No questions, thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Under modified structure, middle of the second page, I have House Bill 266, which changes the dollar amount for when a minor has to get a conservator appointed in probate court.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Efstration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two bills on the third page under structured rule. The first is HB 264. This is the Georgia Rural Congress Center Authority revenue bonds.
No questions, thank you.
Second bill is HB 265, just below it. It's the Quality Jobs Tax Credit Bill.
Madam Pro Tem.
Representative, are there two parts to that bill?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you explain the second part?
Yes, ma'am. So what it would do is, consistent with sales tax exemptions that we provided for the creation of a renovation of certain centers, this would allow for a sales tax exemption for goods concerning a renovation or reconstruction of a facility that includes a theater, symphonic hall, and a museum.
No more questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, in the middle of the page, under modified structure, I bring you House Bill 287. All this does is allow for our Gold Star families to get a second license plate to honor an immediate family member that they lost in the line of duty.
No questions, thank you.
Thank
Mr. Petrie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring to you House Bill 271 on the second page, about midway down. This is a bill that amends the Shoreline Protection Act of 1979 to bring us more uniformity and predictability for landowners, and to better protect our coast, and to also make the Shoreline Protection Act more easily enforced by our regulatory agencies. And so what we're primarily doing here is changing the line of jurisdiction, which is currently drawn, believe it or not, by going from 20-foot tree, native tree, to 20-foot native tree to pre-1979 structure. And so it creates a very frustrating line to understand kind of who's in and who's out of state authority. What we're doing is moving to a jurisdictional line that follows the shoreline, and that line would be a 25-foot distance from the toe of the most landed dune, 25 feet from a shoreline stabilization project, or 25 feet from the high water mark.
The high water mark being high tide?
King tide, that's correct, sir.
Definition of a dune.
Sir?
What's the definition of a dune?
Definition of a dune is defined in the Act. I'll read that for you, Chairman.
What's the change?
The changes in the current law, it actually changes where it mentions wind. It changes that to wind, tidal, or wave action. And what we're trying to do there is to make sure that we're emphasizing these are shoreline dunes, these are coastal dunes, not fall line dunes that exist in this state as well. We've also further changed a section of this to emphasize that this also pertains to beach renourished dunes. That's in there on line 42. And on line 44 to 47, we actually emphasize some of the vegetation that would be on primary dunes, such as sea oats and beach morning glory. And we go on to emphasize that mounds of sand on line 45 covered with a planted and maintained lawn or landscaping shall not be considered dunes, to make sure that we are very clear for the department on what is a dune and what isn't.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to commend the author for this bill. It was heard 3 times in subcommittee in addition to a full committee hearing. I think we have struck a proper balance between private property rights and also the quality of life for our citizens of Georgia and protecting our natural resources.
Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo the Chairman Smith's comments. Good bill. And I guess saying in another way that the prior rules were dependent upon native trees. So basically with a chainsaw or a recent hurricane, some of the things that were demarcating property are now gone or could be easily taken away. Not a very good system going forward.
Chairman, thank you for your comment. Let me just add something to that. We have homes now that are 3, 4, and 5 houses, lots removed from the dune system that are in jurisdiction, and we have homes that are right up adjacent to the dunes that are out of jurisdiction. There's absolutely no way for property owners in this state to know who's in or who's out unless you call DNR and they figure out where a native 20-foot tree is. And it's pretty easy to cut down a tree. You can do it in about 5 minutes, and it's pretty easy to plant trees today as well. So your comment is well made.
I'm not real worried about that. I'm worried about 25 feet. Ms. Ballinger.
Thank you, Chairman. I did have a question on line 46 and 47 about mounds of sand that are stabilized by indigenous vegetative cover shall not be considered sand dunes. So my question, I know erosion is a problem and that sort of thing. So why would that not be considered a sand dune?
Yeah. So here's what happens on the coast, Representative. You have primary dunes, you have secondary dunes, and so as you have species such as cedar and wax myrtle and scrub oak, they begin to take root further back from the primary dunes. And I think what the department is trying to do here, in order to make this act more enforceable, is to emphasize what a primary dune is and to separate that out from a secondary dune. So where you have that stabilized indigenous vegetative cover, that would be a dune that's removed from the shoreline. It would be more stabilized. It'd be more substantive vegetative cover there than you see with sea oats and morning glory.
So a stabilized dune isn't a dune?
A stabilized dune would be a dune that is with more substantive vegetative cover beyond just grass and sea oats, correct.
So this bill is going to guarantee me that all my hurricanes and tornadoes and everything, they're going to come at low tide?
No, sir, I can't
thank
guarantee
goodness
that.
it did last time. No more questions. Thank you. Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. HB 137 is the third bill below the modified open rule on the first page. This is a bill that would add transparency to the process around civil asset forfeiture. When a district attorney decides to subcontract that work to a special ADA, it would require a contract to be on file with the courts and the prosecuting attorney's council, as well as require that there will be no relationship between the value of the property seized and the compensation for the special assistant district attorney.
No questions.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Dubnik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I bring before you today 3 bills. I'll be extremely brief. The first is House Bill 275 under modified structure, about halfway down on the second page. I bring this legislation on behalf of the Georgia DNR as it includes housekeeping language and an important public safety measure. It defines wake surfing and body surfing, 2 relatively new water sports, where we would require wake surfers to wear a life jacket and body surfers to only do so behind a boat with an inboard motor or a jet drive motor.
Next bill.
House Bill 403 under modified open on the first page, about 2/3 of the way down. This legislation defines the number of members of the House and Senate Interstate Cooperation Committees to be at least 5 members.
No questions. Next one.
House Bill 432 under modified structure on the second page at the very bottom. This legislation amends the requirements for a non-proprietary institution of higher education to receive tuition equalization grants, Georgia Student Access loans, and other related state funding when a for-profit university transitions to a not-for-profit.
Ms. Abrams.
Can you give me an example of a school in Georgia that would qualify for this?
Yes, ma'am. Herzing University, we believe, is, based on all of our research, is the only university that would be affected by this.
Thank you.
Herzing, Herzing.
Mr. Earhart.
Thank you. Representative, I want to take you back to 275. I want to make sure you spoke correctly. It's the first time I've seen your bill. You said that you can't do wake surfing unless you're pulled behind a boat?
If you're wake surfing, currently the law states that if you're being pulled behind a boat, you must be wearing a life jacket. Wake surfing is a fairly new water sport. You get up by holding the rope, but then you drop the rope. And in that case, by the letter of the law, you're not required to wear a life jacket. So this is just kind of closing that loophole to require life.
But it also says it includes wakeboarding and that type of thing.
Because of the board, the nature of the board is typically, that's used is typically a wake board.
What if you're pulled by a cable?
I would assume a rope or a cable. In this case, as I understand,
A cable without a boat. There's a very large sport in this country, in this state, that has cable wakeboarding. There's hundreds of thousands of people and a lot of tax comes to Georgia. You're saying that they can't do that without a boat?
We're saying if you are behind a boat. So I would think in your case that would be a different scenario. We're only saying if you're behind a boat.
I want you to check that if you don't mind, please.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I understand Chairman Earhart's concern. I do believe that this code is referring back to the code where it's talking about boats, and if you're pulling someone, you've got to have the mirror there, and you've got to have the life jackets. But what I would do is we will make absolutely sure that we get a definitive, we'll get a department in here, make sure that this is not interfering with some other sports that I know are coming online, and make sure we take care of Chairman Earhart's concern.
I thought Ms. Price was the only freshman that got more than 3 bills. How do you get 3?
I'm just a page for Representative LaRicchia today, and he walked me through everything I needed to know.
LaRicchia, did he give that impassioned speech on low voltage yesterday?
Yes, sir, he did.
I ought to tell you what's happening to that bill. Next. Mr. Clark.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I bring 2 bills today, and both in modified structure. The first bill is House Bill 124. It's 4th from the top, and it's just moving welfare fraud into Title 16, where it should have been all along.
No questions.
The second bill is 5th from the bottom. It's House Bill 401, and currently right now, motorcycle riders can use headsets to communicate to other riders, but they cannot use the headset to say listen to their GPS. And so instead, they maybe by law should go look down at their phone, which is more dangerous. So they can now listen to the GPS through their headset. So that's my reason for this bill. Any questions?
They still got to wear a helmet, don't they?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Mr. Bodie.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm bringing under modified structure rule House Bill 67, which creates the new offense of carjacking in the second degree, and it also eliminates the word vehicle from the current burglary in the second degree statute.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Stovall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I bring before you up on the modified open rule, HR 279, which is the 3rd from the bottom. And what this is actually dedicating a day each year in the state of Georgia as Single Parents Day, and bringing attention to the different challenges that single parents have, and also being able to make sure that we are providing resources to them as they go through it as being single parents.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hilton.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you HB 343, which is on the second page under modified structure rule. HB 343 strikes language from the Georgia Criminal Code, which is deemed derogatory and hurtful to communities across our state. 43 other states have passed similar legislation. I ask that we do the same here in Georgia.
No questions. Thank you. Ms. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I return to mention two bills, House Bill 161 and 165 on the back of the front page, about 8 down, so almost successive numbers. The first bill is the bill for the harm reduction organizations so that they will not suffer any incrimination from handling needles in the needle exchange program. The addition in this bill compared to last year where it passed is that this would now be managed and authorized under law, of course, but directly under the Department of Public Health.
No questions.
The second bill, 165, I have mentioned also here before, maintenance of certification, such that maintenance of certification in physicians would not be a condition of licensure or to work in any state agencies.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Beskid.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Today I bring you House Bill 308 on page 2 under modified structure. This bill would enact provisions recommended by the Georgia Child Support Commission. A lot of cleanups in that code. The two main substantive provisions are to modify slightly the paperwork when there are variable work-related child care costs, and to allow for separate child support worksheets when there's more than one child.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Silcock.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring to you again House Bill 293. It's under modified structure on the second page, about 2/3 of the way down. This is really just a cleanup bill in the child hearsay statute. The practical effect of this bill would be in more convictions of child molesters and others who wish to do harm to children. Appreciate your consideration.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I bring back on page 2, third from the bottom, HB 427, under the Physicians and Healthcare Practitioners for Rural Areas Assistance. This is requested by the Georgia Board of Physician Workforce. They've already recognized the need to add PAs, nurse practitioners, and dentists to the ones eligible for the service cancelable loans. We actually, I believe, have already appropriated some money for this. This would just clarify in statute that they had the appropriate authorization to use appropriated funds for, in addition to physicians' loan repayment for being in rural areas, also physician assistants and advanced practice registered nurses.
No questions.
Thanks.
Thank you. Members, if you've got one you want to do, press your button. Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the last page, House Bill 354 moves the World Congress Center, the Trade Center in Atlanta into a statewide authority, since we're managed by the World Congress Center today. And I really want to put my name beside Representative Hitchens' House Bill 405 to help with our sorely needed post-Hurricane Matthew problem we had.
Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll put my name by HB 275. When we get this straightened out with Representative Earhart, and again, I'll ask for my licensing bill that is on the sheet. Thank you.
Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name by House Bill 382 by Chairman Pruitt, and also House Bill 427, sir.
Mr. Golick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under modified structure, House Bill 213 adds fentanyl to the drug trafficking statute.
Again, if one has questions, just raise your hand. We'll do questions from hand raising. Mr. Smyrie.
Mr. Chairman, I'll put my name by H.R. 279 on the modified open, and also House Bill 67 on modified structure rule.
What was that last one?
HB 67 modified structure rule.
Okay. Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name by House Bill 271. Thank you.
Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would like to ask for HB 330 and HB 331 under modified open rule. These are both bills that will help our kinship care kids. We have 128,000 of them in the state of Georgia that need support. I'd also like to put my name beside HB 78.
HB what?
HB 78, the Securities Update Bill.
Ms. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for House Bill 360 on the second page under modified structured, and it's to help with our epidemic from a couple of venereal diseases.
I got 360.
360.
Mr. Powell, as in J.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 158 is the last one under structured rule. It is a constitutional amendment which will allow the state legislature to dedicate fees. Currently, it either has to be in the Constitution that they be dedicated, or we can statutorily dedicate it, and it means absolutely nothing. And this will allow us an in-between mechanism by which, under the Constitution, with a 2/3 majority vote by both houses, we can dedicate fees. They would have an automatic sunset in 10 years or less, as stated in the bill, and that in the event of a financial emergency, that we can suspend the dedication for up to 2 years at a time, and that we can do that up to 3 times in a 10-year period. So it's got several safety valves so that we do not tie our hands unnecessarily, but it does allow us to dedicate fees constitutionally through statute.
I would say that's a good bill, but every time I open my mouth, the negatives come out, so I'll just say Ms. Ballinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 279 is about midway down on page 2. Right now, if a victim of domestic violence wants to change her name to try to get away from her abuser, she has to publish it in the paper. And this would do away with that requirement if the judge does find that there has been domestic violence. Thank you. 279.
Mr. A. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for HB 260. Creates a special license plates for the linemen in this state. This is being underwritten by the Georgia EMC. They've already they put up roughly $25,000 with the Revenue Department to post it. They'll sell the tags, and the proceeds will go to the Southeastern Burn Foundation that'll donate that money to the burn centers in the state of Georgia.
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name by the World Congress Center bill, HB 264, and I also did vote for low voltage yesterday.
That looks like that bill might get on. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside HB 330 and HB 405.
Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to place my name beside HB 78.
Okay, that's it. All right, we're going to be setting the calendar for Monday. Is that right? Monday. Okay. Let's do structured first. Under structured, HB 264, do I hear move? Any opposition? It's on. Under structure, HB 265. Any opposition? It's on. HB under structured, HB 301. Any opposition? It's on. Keep up with those. That's 3. Yes, sir. Under modified structure, HB 360. Move. Any opposition? It's on. Under modified structure, HB 343. Move. No opposition. Under modified structure, HB 293. It's on. Under modified structure, HB 279. Any opposition? It's on. Under modified structure, HB 213. Any opposition? It's on. Under modified structure, HB 116. Any opposition? It's on. How many is that? Okay, under modified structure, HB 405. Any opposition? 405. 405. Under modified structure, HB 427. Any opposition? So, that's 11. Under modified structure, HB 308. Any opposition? Under modified structure, HB 124. It's on. The end.